you have lived through almost the entire, with the exception of maybe the first 7, 8, 9 years of the new church. And so you know the entire history of the Seventh-day Adventist from its unlikely beginning to its current status. In a country where communication was non-existent at that time, no roads, no telephones for people to communicate with, and it took 3 months, apparently, to walk from, say, Tigray, where the Battle of Adwa between the Italians and the Ethiopians took place, from there to the capital in central Ethiopia, 3 months of walking. Now, you knew most of the pioneer missionaries. How did they manage to do what they did? I mean, food, transportation, so far away from home and all that. Who were these people? And how did they do all this stuff?
Well, this is partly answered in the previous explanation I gave, how Adventism came to my village. That's just part of the story. But now, let me go back. You know, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was very, very interested in Ethiopia because it's mentioned in the Bible so many times. It is an ancient country. It is a Bible-believing country. And therefore, there was a great deal of interest.
And the Sabbath was also part of it.
That's right. And the Sabbath was also part of it. Matter of fact, the leader of the work in Europe at that time, Conradi, was once translating a book written by J.N. Andrews about the Sabbath. He was translating it from English to German. And as he was translating it, he discovered about Ethiopia from that pamphlet. And Conradi said, "No, where is Ethiopia mentioned in this book?" Now he said, "I must really follow this up and find out about Ethiopia and find out all the possibilities of getting into Ethiopia." So while he was thinking this idea, he had to travel at that very moment from Germany to Jerusalem to visit the Seventh-day Adventist work in Jerusalem. And while he was traveling by boat, he met some black people dressed in these priestly garments and wearing the cross around their necks. And these dark people, he noticed, were always praying before eating. They prayed. And Conradi said, "Well, these are interesting people." He wanted to talk to them, but then he was afraid when to start and how to start conversation. Finally, he couldn't resist the temptation. He said, he introduced himself and he said to them, "Where are you? Where are you from?" And they told him they were Ethiopians going to Jerusalem because they have churches in Jerusalem. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has churches in Jerusalem. So they were traveling from Ethiopia to those churches. Oh, Conradi says, "You are from Ethiopia?" "Yes." "Please tell me about the Sabbath. Do you keep the Sabbath? Do you still keep the Sabbath?" And this priest said, "Yes, we do. We keep both Sabbath, Saturday, and Sunday." And kept on talking and talking. And then, "Do you still have worship on Saturday?" "Yes. If you come to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church on Saturday, this Saturday, you will find us worshiping.
In Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem. He did. And he worshipped with them. And then he wanted to go back and make plans to enter Ethiopia. He tried in many different ways. He tried to get into Ethiopia through the Sudan, through Kenya, through Djibouti, and in every attempt, there was no way. Ethiopia was closed because of the Adwa experience. Missionaries, so-called missionaries, who came first, got a piece of land in Assad, sold it to a great trader, and that became the property of the Italians. And so Ethiopia was very, very worried about missionaries. Therefore, she closed the door. And so that's why Conrad was not able to. But one day, he heard that the Swedish mission had started work in Eritrea. Oh, they said, that's the clue. He said, I'm going to start in Eritrea. And instead of going to Ethiopia, go to Eritrea, because Eritrea was under the Italians in those days. And so he did. He recruited his missionaries, Lindegren and Pearson from Sweden.
This was, I understand, 1907?
That's correct, 1907. He recruited this man and told them, and later on came V.E. Toppenberg and another Grunsned came later on also. That is how they were able to start work in Ethiopia. And after spending 14 years in Eritrea, they found it is very, very difficult to preach the gospel in Eritrea. The Italians didn't want them to preach. These are Protestants. The Italians allow only Catholic missionaries. They like to have only Catholic missionaries, not Protestants. The Coptic people, they don't want any missionaries. The Muslims don't want any missionaries. So the work was very difficult. They had only, I think, in 14 years, they had baptized about 3 people, I think. And so finally they decided to move from Eritrea to Ethiopia, and Toppenberg was the first man to take that step. Toppenberg, who had started the work in Eritrea, he's one of the pioneers. And he re-pioneered also in 1919. He came back after the First World War, the mission was destroyed, he came back and he started it all over again. Now, at that time, 1921, he decided to move to Ethiopia. So there was the Ethiopian consulate in Asmara, went to him, asked him permission, and the consul said to him, I will not give you any paper, any permission to go to Ethiopia. But what I advise you is just go. My wife is going. She's going from Asmara to Missoua, and from Missoua to Djibouti by ship, and from Djibouti to Addis by train. You just go with her. That's what I advise you. If you want to try, that's what you need to do. And Toppenberg said, I will do it. Without any permission, without any paper, he came all the way from Asmara to Addis. And when he came to Addis, there was nobody to welcome him. No Adventists, no friends. He just came by train from Djibouti to Addis, got off on the train, found a hotel, stayed overnight in that hotel. It was called Royal Hotel. And he writes in his book, says, there was nothing royal about it. It was full of rats, mice. A terrible night he had spent in that place. But the following day he started looking for a house. And he found one in Kapana. He rented that house. But that house also was very, very dirty, mud floor, full of lice. And it was terrible. Fortunately for him, when he was traveling from Djibouti to Addis, he had met the secretary of the British legation, and Mr. Shippo, and they had talks. So that morning, he went to the legation, to the British legation, to ask for their protection, because there was no American embassy in those days. He was an American. No American legation, so he said, I need your protection. I want to be registered here, and they registered him. But then, that man, who was the secretary, saw him and said, Mr. Toppenberg, where are you living? Oh, I live down there. I'm living down there. Did you find a good house? No. It wasn't good. Then he said, here is a key for you. Take this key and my servant will show you my house above the river. You open and see. He did. When he looked at it, it was a modern house. Well furnished, clean, a good house. And Toppenberg says, no, I cannot live in this house because I cannot afford the rent. So he gave the key back to the servant. He said, go back and tell your master, I'm sorry, I can't live in this for financial reasons. But this man met him again. And he brought up the same subject. What about the house I offer you? Well, he said, I'm sorry, I can't live in it because I can't afford the rent. He said, did I ask you to pay rent? No. I'm telling you to go and live in that house free of rent. Just live in it. He did. He started the work there in 1921. This is a long story. It takes a book to write all of it, and most of it handwritten. But for our purpose now, because of course you have asked me about these missionaries, this is the first man. I admire that man. I know him because he was my teacher from 1951 to 52. A very godly man.
He stayed there a long time.
Yes. Well, he had to go in between. He went back to East Africa, established to work in East Africa, and came back. So he came to Ethiopia 3 times, actually. 3 times. And that man, he is just like a military general. When he starts on a job, he gives the order, and the order must be carried out. And he did it himself wonderfully. This is only one. He's one of the pioneers. And I don't know how many you want me to mention, but shall I mention a couple
Sure.
more? Okay. The second one I admire is Gunnar Gudmundsen. Gudmundsen is a
Sounds
Norwegian.
like a Scandinavian name.
That's right. He's a Scandinavian. He's from Norway. He came first to Asmara. He stayed with the first group there for a while. But there was not much they could do there. So Gudmundsen tried to enter Ethiopia different ways from the north. But the Italians wouldn't allow him. And the Ethiopians wouldn't allow him. So what did he do? He traveled all the way from Asmara to Khartoum. Sudan. And from Khartoum he came to Ethiopia through Metemma. And he had heard about Sheikh Zacharias and his followers and the first Adventists that were baptized in Farasmeda. This man, following a map he had drawn, came right to my village.
Incredible.
In 1928, he came and visited our people. Later on, after establishing contact in Ethiopia, he traveled again from Asmara to Addis, all the way on foot. And he wore out 4 pairs of shoes.
Wow.
He says.
Wow.
Yeah. He is the man who established the Debre Tower mission.
In northwest Ethiopia.
Northwest Ethiopia. Where we had a hospital, a school, evangelical center, a church, the light of the town. That's the second one I'd like to mention. The third one is Erik Palm. He is from Sweden. Erik Palm is a marvelous man. He is an amazing person. He is the one who assisted establishing the Debre Tower. 1. 2, he is the one who established Desi mission station. 3, he is the one with Stoppenberg who established Kuyira mission. 4, he is the man who established the mission station at Abonsa. And number 5 at Saki. And while he was living there, he was living in a tent. He didn't have any house like this. No. Living in tents, he built many, many mission stations. A very well-rounded person, very good singer, very good preacher, and a health professional, a plumber, electrician, a farmer. There is nothing that Eric Palm wouldn't do. Wow. And yet, I have never seen him claiming any credit for himself after doing all that. He did it all to the glory of God. No, Eric Palm was one of those precious ones. Mm-hmm. There are many others, but let me mention one, Hoganik. Mm-hmm. Maybe you know something about him
also
too.
from Norway.
Yeah, he's Norway, from Norway. A missionary in Ethiopia for 32 years. Mm. And a very selfless man. Always interested in helping the poor people. I was told by Pastor Burhanu that he had bought 40 oxen to give to poor people in that area, pure Adventists. He buys oxen and he gives them.
To plow their field with.
Plow their fields, yeah. And the story of the booth must be told also. Mm-hmm. He had a booth which he used to wear in the May season. But then he saw one of the night guards who didn't have any shoes. He didn't have any shoes. He was barefoot.
Boots that were long to the leg and covered the...
That's right. Mm-hmm. So he gives his own booth to this poor man. He said, you do it during the night, and I will use it during the day. Mm-hmm. At the end of the night, before you go home, bring it, wash it, and put it on the veranda for me, then I'll use it. And he did. He shared his shoes. That was organic, a very godly man. Hansen is another one, the founder of Akaki, who refused to go home when the Italians occupied Ethiopia. He said, I have been here with the Ethiopians in the days when they were free, and I will be with them when they are occupied, until they are free. I stay here. And he and his wife and a couple of other missionaries stayed there.
And he was buried there, in fact.
Yes, he died there and he was buried there. His wife was hoping to die there and be buried, but with the change of government, she couldn't stay there. She had to come here and she died here.
When the emperor, who had gone into exile when the Italians invaded Ethiopia in 1935, came back, and probably the Hansens were the only foreign missionaries that he found. Is that why he put Mrs. Hansen in charge of his kitchen, his palace?
You know, when he came back, when the emperor came back, the town was in a mess. The Italians had left, and they had taken as much as they could, and the British didn't help that either. And his palace was just in a bad shape. Mm-hmm. He was looking for somebody who could clean up the whole thing, set it up properly, and after much searching, they found Mrs. Hansen. Mm-hmm. She was willing to go and assist to clean up everything and set it up properly so that it would function as a palace. Mm-hmm. That's how she was invited and worked with the emperor until 1974, mm-hmm. when he was removed from power.
The Hansens were impact players. I understand, and I met Mrs. Hansen here. I did not know them in Ethiopia. But a lot of high-ranking government officials sent their school to Akaki, where Mr. Hansen was principal. And I understand when he died, all those former students who had now occupied high offices in the government closed shop and showed up for his funeral.
Absolutely correct. Mr. Hansen was liked and appreciated by students very, very much. You know, in Amharic we have two terms when we address people. Mm-hmm. The polite form and the ordinary. Mm-hmm. all missionaries are called by the ordinary form, except Hansen. With Hansen, all his students and all associates, they use this polite form for him. So they had a very high regard for him, and a very good educator, and a very godly man at the same time. Many of the government officials in the early days of Ethiopia, after the Italians were driven out, were his students, many of them. Not only at the time of his death, but even before he died, they had a special celebration for him. I remember a picture of all his students, and he sitting in the middle of them, taken on that occasion. Now, I tell you, he has contributed a lot for the development of Ethiopia by training those young people. They were the only ones. You see, Ethiopia in those days didn't have many educated people. They had very few educated people. And those few came from Akaki, most of them.
Our school.
Yes, our school. Seminary school. And the Minister of Education was educated from there. And the man who was, after the fall of Haile Selassie, who was appointed as Prime Minister, was educated there. Mukonnen Dalkacho. An Akaki graduate. So Akaki has contributed a great deal for the development of Ethiopia in many areas, in many aspects of its development.
I like to add my own appreciation to this record about the contribution of missionaries. I wouldn't be here. I would not be here if it weren't for missionaries. In my case, American missionaries. And the pioneers who lived like us, who ate what our people ate, who slept on dirt floors, who traveled on foot for hundreds of miles, not just a few miles, and established all these institutions. We are indeed in their debt. So we just want to enter that into the record. Since this is a conversation, I'm going to be free to jump around.